In the early hours of August 2nd, 2025, Ukraine pulled off one of the most precise and devastating revenge operations of the entire war. The target: Rosneft's Novokuibishevsk refinery, 600 miles behind enemy lines, the beating heart that pumped fuel into Russia's southern war machine. What Moscow didn't see coming was that Kyiv had been waiting for the perfect moment to respond to the deadliest attack on their capital since this whole nightmare began. 36 hours earlier, on July 31st, Russian missiles and drones had turned Kyiv into hell on earth. 31 people died, and 179 were wounded in what would become the most lethal strike against the Ukrainian capital since the invasion started. Among the victims was Oksana Petrivna, a 42-year-old nurse heading home from her night shift at Okhmatyt Children's Hospital when a Russian missile slammed into her apartment building. Her death, caught live on security cameras and seen by millions on social media, became the symbol Kyiv needed to justify what they were about to unleash. At 2 in the morning on August 2nd, in a secret military base in the Poltava region, Colonel Dmytro Kovalenko received the order he'd been waiting months for. A 28-year veteran of the Ukrainian Air Force, Kovalenko commanded the country's most secretive and lethal long-range drone unit. They'd had this target picked out for months, but political orders had kept them on a leash. Now, after the Kiev massacre, all restrictions were off. The Novokuibishevsk refinery wasn't just any target. Owned by Rosneft, Russia's massive state oil giant, this facility processed 8.3 million tons of crude oil annually, equivalent to 160,000 barrels a day. Its atmospheric distillation unit 11, known as CDU-11, was the heart of the entire operation, processing 18,900 tons of crude every single day. Destroying CDU-11 meant shutting down the entire refinery and cutting fuel supplies to the Russian regions of Rostov, Krasnodar, and occupied Crimea. Kovalenko studied the refinery blueprints one last time on his tactical screen. Years of satellite surveillance had revealed every detail of the installation. The exact location of CDU-11, the surrounding air defense systems, security patrol routes, even the shift change schedules of the workers. Ukrainian intelligence had identified a vulnerability window between 5 and 6 in the morning, when the fewest personnel would be on site. The weapon chosen for this mission was the most advanced Ukrainian long-range drone ever deployed, a modified variant of the system that had proven capable of flying over 600 miles into enemy territory. Its 330-pound explosive payload had been specifically designed to penetrate reinforced industrial structures and generate maximum thermal damage in petroleum facilities. At 3:15 in the morning, the drone lifted off from its hidden launch platform in a Poltava forest. Its route had been meticulously planned to avoid major concentrations of Russian air defenses, flying north initially before turning east and then southeast, following river valleys and areas of minimal radar coverage. The flight would take approximately 2.5 hours, just enough time for the night shift at the refinery to reach its most vulnerable point. As the drone cut through the night sky toward its target, at the Novokuibishevsk refinery, Chief Shift Engineer Alexei Volkov was making his routine inspection rounds. Volkov, a 27-year veteran of the Russian oil industry, had worked at this refinery for the past decade and knew every sound, every vibration, every indicator in the plant. That morning, however, something was bothering him. Security alerts had ramped up in recent weeks following Ukrainian attacks on other refineries, but being 600 miles from the front made Novokuibishevsk feel untouchable. What Volkov didn't know was that 300 miles away, his refinery had already appeared on the tracking screens of the Ukrainian command center. The drone had successfully crossed Russian airspace, evading 3 belts of air defenses, and now flying at barely 160 feet, following the course of the Volga River to minimize radar detection. At 5:45 in the morning, the drone entered its final approach phase. Its electro-optical sensors identified the characteristic structures of the refinery: the distillation towers, spherical storage tanks, smokestacks spewing constant flames into the night sky, and there, in the center of the complex, the imposing tower of CDU-11. a 200-foot-tall cylindrical steel structure that processed most of the facility's crude. Volkov was checking pressure gauges in the main control room when the first alarm started screaming. These weren't the usual process alarms, but perimeter security alerts. On the closed-circuit video screens, thermal cameras had detected an unidentified object approaching at high speed from the southwest. For 15 crucial seconds, Volkov hesitated over whether it was a large bird or something more dangerous. Emergency protocol dictated immediate activation of the plant's emergency shutdown system. But doing so would cost millions of rubles in lost production and could damage sensitive equipment. In those 15 seconds of hesitation, the refinery's fate was sealed. At 5:58 in the morning, the Ukrainian drone identified its final target, the base of the CDU-11 tower, where high-pressure pipelines converged at the point of greatest structural vulnerability. Ukrainian intelligence had determined that an impact at that specific spot would cause a cascade reaction that would destroy the entire unit. Volkov saw the flash on the security cameras a split second before impact. A bright light was coming straight at the main tower, moving too fast to be intercepted. Instinctively, he hit the general alarm button and screamed over the radio for all teams to evacuate the area immediately. At 5:59 minutes and 30 seconds in the morning, the drone slammed into the base of CDU-11 with precision that would have been enviable even for a guided missile. The initial explosion disintegrated the impact point, but it was the secondary reaction that turned the attack into a total catastrophe for Rosneft. The blast wave ruptured the high-pressure pipelines feeding hot hydrocarbons to the tower. Within seconds, thousands of gallons of high-temperature crude oil spilled over adjacent structures. Sparks from the initial explosion found the perfect fuel, and a fireball over 300 feet in diameter rose into the night sky. Volkov and his team ran for the underground shelters as secondary explosions rocked the entire refinery. Automatic fire suppression systems activated, but the magnitude of the blaze had overwhelmed their response capacity. In less than 5 minutes, flames had reached nearby storage tanks, causing a series of explosions that could be heard more than 12 miles away. The Ukrainian reconnaissance satellite captured the first images of the impact at 6:05 in the morning. A black smoke column several miles high was rising from the exact coordinates of CDU-11. Thermal cameras showed multiple fire sources scattered throughout the facility, confirming that the attack had exceeded all expectations. In Kyiv, President Volodymyr Zelensky was briefed on the operation's success at 6:30 in the morning. Preliminary satellite imagery showed that the Novokuibishevsk refinery had been essentially knocked out of commission. It was the response Ukraine had been waiting to deliver since the Kyiv attack 36 hours earlier. The Russian reaction was immediate, but revealed the magnitude of the blow they'd taken. Samara Region Governor Vyacheslav Fedorishchev confirmed the attack but downplayed the damage, talking about a controlled fire that had been quickly contained. However, social media images told a very different story: a refinery in flames with explosions that continued for hours. The economic consequences of the attack were felt immediately in global markets. Novokuibishevsk processed 18,000 tons of crude oil daily, producing annually 1.1 million tons of gasoline, 1.6 million tons of diesel, and 1.3 million tons of fuel oil. Its shutdown represented an immediate loss of 5% of Russian refining capacity in a strategic region. But the military impact was even more significant. Novokuibishevsk was the main fuel supplier for Russian operations in the south, including occupied Crimea and the Rostov and Krasnodar regions, where Russia maintains crucial air and naval bases for its war effort. The refinery shutdown would force Moscow to redirect supplies from more distant facilities, exponentially increasing logistical costs. Engineer Volkov survived the attack but lost his workplace of a decade. In an unauthorized interview that leaked days later, he described the surgical precision of the impact. They knew exactly where to hit. It wasn't luck, it was perfect planning. They destroyed the heart of the plant with a single blow. Later, technical analyses revealed the sophistication of the Ukrainian operation. The drone had flown 600 miles into enemy territory, evaded multiple air defense systems, and struck a target barely 30 feet in diameter with absolute precision. For Western military experts, it represented a qualitative leap in Ukrainian asymmetric warfare capabilities. Rosneft officially acknowledged that the refinery would remain closed for scheduled maintenance for an indefinite period. Industry sources confirmed that CDU-11 had been completely destroyed and that its reconstruction would take at least 6 months, assuming specialized components could be imported despite international sanctions. The Novoku-Ibishevsk attack was coordinated simultaneously with strikes on other Russian facilities: the Ryazan refinery, the Ananefta product depot in Voronezh, the Electropribor plant in Penza, and the Primorsko-Akhtarsk air base where Russia stored Shahed drones. It was a demonstration that Ukraine had developed the capability to execute coordinated long-range operations against multiple targets simultaneously. Russian authorities immediately intensified defenses around critical energy facilities, deploying additional Pantsir systems and reinforcing electronic surveillance. But the Ukrainian message had been sent loud and clear: no target on Russian territory was beyond the reach of Ukrainian revenge. For Russia, Novokuibishevsk became a symbol of vulnerability. Despite being 600 miles from the front, despite multiple layers of defenses, despite the sense of invulnerability that distance provided, Ukraine had demonstrated it could strike at the very heart of Russian energy infrastructure whenever it chose to do so. European energy markets registered immediate volatility. Although Novokuibishevsk exported mainly to Asian markets, its shutdown confirmed the effectiveness of Ukraine's strategy of attacking the infrastructure that sustains the Russian war effort. Analysts projected that similar attacks could reduce Russian refining capacity by 15% if sustained over the coming months. President Putin made no public comment on the attack, but Kremlin sources confirmed emergency National Security Council meetings. The ease with which Ukraine had penetrated Russian defenses and destroyed a critical facility 600 miles from the front represented an escalation that Moscow hadn't anticipated. In the following days, commercial satellite imagery confirmed that the refinery remained completely inactive. The flames had been extinguished, but the main structures of CDU-11 appeared as a twisted metal skeleton. Adjacent storage tanks showed significant damage, and the entire eastern section of the complex remained closed for safety reasons. For Ukraine, Novokuibishevsk represented more than a tactical victory. It was proof that 3.5 years after the start of the Russian invasion, Kyiv had developed capabilities that allowed it to take the war directly to Russian territory with devastating effects. The equation of the conflict had fundamentally changed. The attack also sent a clear message to international markets: Russia was not capable of protecting its critical energy infrastructure, even in the heart of its own territory. For buyers of Russian oil, this represented a supply risk they hadn't previously considered. As Russian emergency teams continued assessing damage at Novokuibishevsk and Rosneft engineers began calculating the months needed to rebuild CDU-11, one question echoed in power centers both in Moscow and Kyiv: if Ukraine could destroy a refinery 600 miles from the front with such devastating precision, what other strategic Russian targets were really safe? The war had entered a new phase, where distance no longer guaranteed security and where Ukrainian capability to project power into Russian territory had reached levels that would forever change the dynamics of the conflict. Subscribe if you want to know how precision strikes are redefining the rules of modern warfare and what targets might be next on Ukraine's list.